So thank you very much again for to everybody for joining us today. It's going to be well, in fact, we've just been reminded through just the sound live from Kyiv what how important a subject that we're going to explore today, and how hugely relevant it is. So today is going to be the last of our research center, Creature. Creature stands for Creative Arts, Cultures and Engagement, and it's the last of our AAD sessions. AAD is our School of Art, Architecture and Design. Before we start, I'm going to ask people to please switch off their mics. Just if you could just double check that your mic is definitely switched off, because otherwise you'll hear lots of noise in the background. And then also, I'm going to ask, if that's all right with you, this is more for the purpose of the video, to also check that your camera is off, unless you're one of the speakers. But then, of course, you're very welcome to switch it on again later on when we open the debate. So up until then, it'd be great, just for the sake of the video, to keep, and also I'm sure for you, you'll appreciate it more to see to just have the speakers visible. And so my name is Jacek Ludwigskaso. I'm reader in art and performance, and I'm deputy director of Creature. So once again, our research center in creative arts, cultures and engagement. And I'm really delighted today to have this very special session in which we're going to look at two important case studies of acts of resistance that will span from Kyiv. Will be also we'll have Marc Wilkins, who's live from Kyiv at the moment. So as we saw before, we probably will hear the noise of Kyiv at this moment. And then we will span across different countries. And in fact, in Aleks Catina's presentation, will be exploring a case study also in Lusanga. Marc has been kindly invited by Anna Kim, and I'm going to introduce all our speakers in a second. But first of all, just a reminder that to please make sure that your mic is switched off, and maybe Marianne, if you can also help with that, that'll be great. And to make sure that once again that your camera is off. We will be recording this event, and the video from this event will then be available on our Creature website, and it will be essentially available as a podcast for future reference. And we encourage that, because that also helps us to keep these important discussions alive for longer than the date itself that we're showing them. So we're going to start, and I'm going to introduce the first talk. And the first talk really is a conversation, and it's a conversation, as I said, between Dr. Anna Kim and with filmmaker Marc Wilkins, who's live from Kyiv. So I'm just going to read a couple of details just to give you a little bit of context to this talk. So Dr. Kim is the new leader for research projects and partnerships advancing the university's here at London Met. The university's aim to support ambitious, high-quality research and build partnerships to extend its impact both locally and across the world. She brings over a decade of experience with innovative multidisciplinary institutes of advanced studies in the US, UK, and Europe, advancing research projects and public-facing discourse on subjects of critical contemporary concern. Dr. Kim is a member of the Centre for Research in Creative Arts, Cultures and Engagement and London Met Labs Environment Group. Her work has been supported by numerous fellowships and awards, including a five-year Andrew Mellon Fellowship in the Humanities at Brown University, a Mellon Postdoctoral Fellowship at the Courtauld Institute of Art, a Research Fellowship at the Free University in Berlin, an AHRC Networking Grant, Crescent Jefferson Foundation funds, and prior to London Met, Dr. Kim was a visiting research fellow at UCL and associate fellow at King's College London. She currently is an associate fellow for Thriving Cities Lab at the University of Virginia. So Anna Kim would then interview Marc Wilkins, who is a filmmaker who invited her previously last year to Kyiv before obviously this situation arose, or so directly, to advise on creating Ukraine's first district for contemporary arts and culture. With the country under siege and artists' lives at risk, Marc has turned his efforts to holding their stories and supporting humanitarian efforts on the ground, using his platform as an award-winning professional to engage the widest possible international audience. Marc will present his project, #U4Ukraine, a series of short documentaries which record conversations with artists and cultural workers at the site of the invasion. His intention is to bring the West closer to the current situation in Ukraine, but also to demonstrate the creativity and courage of the people who remain. The series gives a public face to individuals whose lives have been transformed by the war, engaging the viewer directly and personally, creating a shared sense of catastrophe, but also positive means of making a difference. So at this point, I'm going to open up the discussion between Anna and Marc, and I'm going to leave you to expand on this. And of course, we also really look forward to seeing some samples from Marc's very important project. And then after that, I'm going to introduce our second speaker, Aleks Catina. And then, as I said, later on, we'll come back all together to then also hopefully generate some more discussion. And we very much welcome questions also from the audience. But for now, we'll keep the conversation just for the speakers. So thank you, Anna. Thank you, Marc.
Thank you, Jacek, for that very lovely introduction. Could I ask Dirya, the guest, if you could please turn off your camera so we could see the video?
If that's okay. Dirya, can you see us? Yes, so your camera is still on. So
is it possible to turn off your camera? And I'm not sure if.
Yeah, maybe we can help. Maybe Mariana can. We can sort of see if we can help. Otherwise, let's start.
Okay. I promise not to get too emotional, but when Marc opened his window and let us hear the sounds of the air raid siren in Kyiv, it was a stark reminder of what's bringing us here together tonight. And Marc, Bitayu, thank you very much for joining us. I want to turn over directly to you to give you this platform to talk about the project, which means so much to all of us as you bring together your professional filmmaking and your great humanitarian spirit in U4Ukraine. So please, Marc.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna, for inviting, for bringing us together here. Thank you, Jacek, for the introduction. Yes, it was just exactly at I think it's 5:30 in London when suddenly the air raid alarm here started outside, and you know, the sound was just there, and suddenly here in our call, and I realized how much I got used to it. The first few times when I heard this alarm, which goes on every time any missiles and Russian jets are heading towards Ukraine, and it's not clear yet in which direction, which city is being attacked. Those air raid alarm goes on, and in the beginning, the first, I think 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we all were kind of seeking shelter in the metro station and in the basements, but now somehow we got used to it. And I never thought, first of all, that in my life I will hear this sound coming, really from a roof outside and not from a movie I'm watching. And I never thought I would have to react to it and seek shelter. But now it is happening. And I think this is a little bit also the bridge to the topic, culture as an act of resistance. As a filmmaker, I moved to Kyiv 6 years ago, just because I fell in love with the society, the Ukrainian people who are so full of energy to transform their country. And when the war started, I was just paralyzed. I thought I couldn't even listen to music, look at photographs. There was just no space at all for culture, and it was so strange for me, somebody who is, I'm listening to music in the morning. I cannot get up without feeling, music, and I couldn't listen to it anymore, and absolutely not write anymore. I had to stop all the projects I was working on. But after a few I think 3 or 4 weeks, my producers from Switzerland called me, and very kind of so angry and upset and shocked and sad, and asked me what they could do. And we decided to create short films together, short documentaries about Ukrainian, we said, unintentional heroes, people who, whose lives stopped, like all the lives of the 44 million Ukrainians stopped on the 24th of February. And everybody had to find their own way of how to deal with the situation, and how to resist, how to turn, those 44 million lives into 44 million ways of resisting. So there is a microphone on again now, and it's difficult. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And so yeah, I created those little short films, which are on one hand fundraising films to raise funds for directing projects on the ground. But what was in a way maybe even more important for me is to introduce those Ukrainian protagonist characters, people who are fighting with their means against the invasion, to an international audience. And as we cannot really go out with a camera at the moment and film on the street or travel somewhere to film. Most of those films were made through Instagram, Facebook, social media content, and Zoom interviews, online interviews, FaceTime conversations. And I think, yeah, maybe I will just show you one of those films. What do you think, Anna? Shall I share one, or maybe we want to talk a little bit more?
Yes, let's go ahead and see the film.
My name is Ksyusha. 2 years ago, I opened a floral shop with my friend. And it's a beautiful place in Kyiv with amazing flowers. So today I stayed at home because I didn't have power to work, as we used to work all these 2 weeks. We arranged 1,000 warm jackets and 270 boots for soldiers. It's cold, so tomorrow we'll give them these warm shoes. When the war started, the first day I was just shocked. The second day we went to blood center to give some blood for our soldiers. And then we decided to help make these social packages to pensioners, to people with disabilities, to children who spent their night at subway. So this is our work now. It's my city, I need to defend it, I don't know, I need to help here. There are a lot of injured people from Kyiv surgery department, and they don't have even enough washing machine to wash this blood. We're collecting money for this hospital. We will be very glad to receive your help. I miss my flowers, and I just want to take flowers in my hands.
Thank you, Marc. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the structure of your films. But at first, I just want to go back to what you said at the beginning of your talk, and it's something that you and I have talked about, because I think that we grew up in a generation that was very much influenced by living in the wake of the world wars and the Holocaust, and the quote by Theodor Adorno that after Auschwitz, to write poetry or to write a poem is barbaric. And we're not quite sure what he meant by that, but it has, as it has come to have meaning for our generation, it really was that there can be no, how could you imagine art and celebration and poetry after such a horror? And I think that, you know, by deep contrast, there's something. Hello, can someone turn off their mic? Thank you. By contrast, I think we both see with this war in Ukraine such a powerful antidote to that. You know, the use of culture as a form of resistance and really acts of joy as a kind of you know, a collective power. I wonder if you wanted to say something about the spirit in which, you know, that you see among the artists and the people resisting.
I think without any joy and without any culture, we would be broken, and Ukraine, you know, would be conquered, you know, in a day. I understand more and more that by continuing creating and also creating joy, we are gathering strengths and recharge the energy of us as a society. If I may include myself, I'm not a wannabe Ukrainian, not a real Ukrainian. So I see that, you know, after those first weeks of being paralyzed, of being really like unable to think creatively, all of my artist friends, creative friends started to use their talent and their desire to create to support the defense. If it's on a communication level, or also fundraising, or supporting the military by going to the front with your guitar and playing songs. I mean, there is the most famous Ukrainian musician, Sviatoslav Vakarchuk. He's the head of a band called Okean Elzy. He is filling stadiums with people. Like, he is like, you know, you cannot listen to, you know, 5 minutes radio without a song of him being played. He just took his guitar and he went to the front and played music for the soldiers to give them energy and motivation. So it is, without culture, there cannot be any resistance. Resistance needs culture.
I was glad to see that you had a video of Slava, because when I was in Ukraine with my boys, you know, in the 90s, Okean Elzy was just the very, you know, that was the coolest band. So it's great to see that they're still around. Yeah, maybe we can talk more, because, you know, this talk that I was supposed to give about my research went through several possibilities, and first I was going to actually talk about, you know, this brave effort to create the first district of arts and contemporary culture in Kyiv, which you were spearheading, and I thought of a title which would be an experiment in cultural democracy. And then that project got put on hold. And then I was invited to write a publication on trauma-informed approaches to placemaking. And I was thinking today that actually both of those themes still sort of resonate in this context. You know, how how you approach creativity and making a place, as you say, with this sort of injection of positivity that comes from the freedom of creativity, but also deeply informed by a realization of the trauma of the place. And then also, you know, as we've spoken about, that you know, culture really is something fundamental. It's a human right, and that to exercise it is an important form of democracy. I mean, really, it's the last thing that someone can take away is your freedom of expression and freedom to be creative, right? And this is being recognized more and more at sort of the level of human rights, which is interesting. Yeah, those are some of my thoughts on this day. Maybe you could tell a little bit about what it's like in Kyiv now that artists and people are coming back, but you have this sort of dual responsibility to actually carry out, I'm sure, a lot of physical duties in the city. What is it like now?
It's you know, you have to find a balance between helping the defense, and this is the most important thing now, to find freedom and peace, right? And we don't say to peace, but to victory now, because and peace will not exist without freedom, and freedom only comes through victory. And so we are all kind of dividing our day into half. You know, half of the day you work for the defense, whatever you can do, or helping other people, helping with humanitarian aid, and the other half of the day. And it took me some time to allow myself that, and not to feel guilty, and to invest into your own projects, into something which has nothing to do with the war, with the crisis, something you worked on even maybe already before the war, or a new idea which has nothing to do with the war. But this is even, and this realization came that this is also an act of resistance, to not allow the aggressor, Russia, to stop you from creating what you actually wanted to create. And so, yeah, so I would say it's half-half, and we see that more and more, right? That more and more people are starting to, you know, open up their businesses, also for economical reasons. This is another act of resistance, you know, is to keep the economy up, and as good as it goes, as good as it works, as much as it's possible.
Yeah, I want to give a chance to see another one of your films, but I wanted to ask you, because I know that your first feature-length film is being debuted right now, Saint of the Impossible. And what's it like? And I'm sure you're using your platform as an international filmmaker to speak for Ukraine. How does your work sort of sit together publicly?
No, I was in you know, all the festivals I was invited the last 3 months. I couldn't attend. I couldn't visit festivals. I couldn't leave Ukraine and just be somewhere in a festival, and I needed to, you know, to be here. But I was then, you know, sending video messages, and my film, The Saint of the Impossible, is a political film. It's about 2 Peruvian illegal immigrants trying to survive in New York City under Donald Trump. And so I spoke about Ukraine in my thank you video messages, and you know, and I want to encourage filmmakers to be more political in cinema. I'm missing that, you know, like political cinema, truly political cinema.
Do you want to show another couple of films? I mean, I was really struck by the film of Anuka, because it was so stark, the contrast between her stardom and then what came afterwards. I think that one is really powerful. They're all powerful, but
yeah. Then let's watch Anuka's film. Give me just a quick second to open it up. So Anuka is another fantastic musician, artist, she is combining contemporary electronic music with Ukrainian folkloristic music in a way. And she is working together with her husband, Eugene, who is also a producer and has his own music project. They have a son, a little boy, and they were, when the war started, they were driving to the west of Ukraine and were hiding in a not a bunker, because that's also so interesting. So they found a kind of an art center with a performance space in the basement. And this performance space was the safest place in this little town. So whenever the air raid alarm went on, they went into this theater, into this empty theater, into the basement to be safe from the bombs. And Anuka so this was the very first interview she gave after the war started. You will see she's still quite in shock, but they came back to Kyiv, and now they're starting a big world tour with Anuka. Like, her name is actually Nata, and Anuka is the name of her project. Anuka means grandmother in Ukrainian. And now they're going to start a world tour, and they're going to tour around the world, perform in every big cities, and donate the money to the defense of Ukraine. I will play the film.
We are Ukrainian artists. I am Anuka with Eugen.
Put your hands together for the hugely talented Anuka.
Thank you.
Directly, we are in a bomb shelter.
We are still in Ukraine, and we don't want to go abroad.
Sasha is now good. He don't understand at all what's happening right now. When it's air alarm, we just play a role like this is a kind of game, you know?
Try to amuse him as we can.
Somehow we break apart with our band members and the friends, and all we do each morning is just to make a quick chart. How is everything? How is everybody? Are you still alive? Are you okay?
Just one question. Alive and the plus slide. Yes. Our new release, it was like a soundtrack dedicated to Ukrainian constructivism. We were writing it in a dedication to their beauty and their mighty, and they were just exploded during these 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. When the alarm is turning and we have to hide, there is no thoughts left than just to survive and to save our kid. We want to support Span One Foundation, and it supports medicine and some medical equipment to children who have suffered from Russian aggression. Thank you so much for your donations.
Thank you, Marc. I think that these films are so powerful, and we need to keep trying to find creative ways to engage people as the war grinds on. I know that this has been a very successful venture. Can you say a little bit about it, just to wrap up? How effective it's been, or where it's been shown?
You know, I think it's difficult to measure the success of it. But on one hand, we collected $50,000 and more than $50,000, which all went into the small projects, which is a lot in a way. But I think the mental success is fantastic. We had a Zoom call yesterday with all the U4Ukraine people who helped the project and all the protagonists, and to just see how much, you know, optimism and encouragement and connections and friendships and support came out of this project. I think makes it a success, and we are continuing. We did 15 films now. They're all on this website, Youth for Ukraine, and we continue making those films till victory.
All right. Is there anything you would like to say to all of us from Kyiv?
Please continue doing what you're doing now. You know, being connected with Ukraine. Stand with Ukraine. Listen, watch, observe, support with your open mind and attention. And this is, you know, what you said already, Anna, a little bit. Our worry is a bit, of course, that people get used to it, and people get used to the war and start to forget about it, and new things are happening, and Ukraine is starting to be left alone against the country, which is 28 times bigger and much more, you know, brutal and violent. So yeah, please stand with Ukraine. That's what I would like to ask.
Thank you so much, Marc. Дуже приємно, дуже дякую. Slava Ukraina. And we look forward to the discussion. Okay. Over to you, Jacek.
Thank you so much, Marc, and thank you, Anna, for facilitating this interview. This is these are incredibly powerful testimonies of this unthinkable situation, and it's unthinkable for us who are lucky not to be at the center of it. But of course, you know, they're very, very absolutely real and incredibly impactful in the way that you described, and that also your films very powerfully convey. So Marc, and Anna, no doubt we'll have opportunities to discuss further these issues that you raised, and again you raised some really fundamental points as to the role of art in the state of an emergency, and that actually art, of course, is absolutely can be one of the tools to help in this type of situation. So we'll come back to this topic in the last part of the session, and in the meantime, I'm going to now introduce our second speaker. So once again, just to remind everybody, so we're going to have another contribution, and then for the last 20 minutes or so, hopefully even a little bit more, perhaps we can then spend some time to interrogate the different issues that have been explored today, and to take an opportunity to also for you to, of course, to also ask questions. So thank you very much, Aleks, for joining us now, and I'm going to just quickly introduce what you're going to speak about. So Aleks Catina is going to discuss with us the notion of provincialized irony as a differentiating factor in the art practices of the global north and the global elsewhere. Aleks teaches history and theory of architecture both here at London Met and at UEL. He has been running a postgraduate, very popular module here at London Met for the last 10 years entitled Problem of Irony. He's currently also a postgraduate research student at Birkbeck, University of London, and the working title of his PhD is Unofficial Architectures of Irony, Provincializing Postmodernism in Second and Third World Spatial Practices. The PhD is supervised by Professor Marc Wilkins, who's also the director of the Architecture Society and the Space Centre. Aleks also has a forthcoming book which will soon be published by Coeur de Poétique and is titled The Pillars of Uncertainty. So over to you, Aleks. Thank you very much for sharing your research with us.
Thank you very much. Let me just go through the clicks, please. Let's see. Okay, am I good? Can you see me? Can
Perfectly.
I have thumbs up? Okay. Okay, let me just see if that will work. Because I can't see it, sorry.
So you just need to put it on slideshow, Aleks. If you go on the slideshow button.
Slideshow button? I've never seen this button before, but I can click through it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh,
that's right.
yes,
So
yes.
at the moment we just see. It means
oh yeah, no, I get it. Sorry.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. That's the slideshow button, yeah. Okay, we'll never cease learning. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I will keep it in hopefully within 20 minutes or so. My work, this is a presentation I work on process on a chapter I'm writing for my PhD, where I developed a discussion on the role of decoloniality and the relearning of practices of resistance. My focus today will be on the question of whether irony can be effectively provincialized through or in critical practice. So provincialization necessarily implies a setting that is not the center. By the center, we mean here the developed world, the West, or what used to be called the First World. Provincialization is about the relation of this other setting to the center. It acknowledges the difference that this elsewhere embodies in historical, cultural, and socio-economical terms. This elsewhere is for me somewhere what I try to learn from. We are in this picture at the opening of the White Cube in Lusanga in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2017. Lusanga used to be called Leverville after the firm, the company Lever, which we now today better know as Unilever. It was for a long time a major hub of the oil palm industry. The exploitation rights for the land and its people was granted by the Belgian colonial government to the Lever Company in 1911. And the exploitation of the land at least has ceased only in the early 21st century. The White Cube is an art project as well as a new institution. The stakeholders within this project are the Institute for Human Activities, who is headed by the Dutch artist Renzo Martens, who you see here in the picture channeling the Fitzgeraldo character with the stray hat. The other main stakeholder are the Cercle des Travailleurs de Plantation Congolais, group of former plantation workers who have turned to art practice. Martens will be the one that we will be of interest to us in the first part of the talk, as he is the artistic mastermind and the strategist behind this art project. The project has two goals. One that I can sort of identify as the main goals. For the first one is to establish a link to the wider art industry where the participants, the artist participants, can market their work and sustain their living. The other one is to with the proceeds from this dealing with the wider art world, to sustain, to buy back the land that was taken from them. So the first sort of obvious thing that is to be said here is the idea of remoteness. This is not a gallery that any of us here, or most of us, I should say, maybe, are likely to visit in person. And very few of us will ever see an elevation other than this one, which is the prominent one that is always pictured when we look at it in press releases. The architecture of the White Cube is an architecture of the image. Of course, we have to bring the intention back to our mind that the building is to be a symbol that grants access to wider networks of international art market. Therefore, it is sort of assimilating a certain language. For the building, Martens has brought in OMA, a very famous Dutch architectural office. And what we can probably ask naively, maybe, if this is a critical piece of architecture. And the question is actually naive, given the sort of statement that I have put here on screen by the managing partner of OMA, who underscores sort of the disciplinary autonomy of the practice as its trademark, a practice that will not attach itself to ideological bias. But I want to just put this into context, what might be a definition of critical practice in architecture, and there are many, of course, but let me take something that is short and and Poignant by K. Michael Hayes, who defined it as the constant imagination, search, and construction of alternatives. Speaking of alternatives, why we can look just as the master plan here and ask straight away why this modernist trope of zoning is employed here in the middle of the bush. And maybe another question. By the way, we will talk about the architecture if we, in more detail if we want, but for now it is really the image that concerns us. So why is the building white? I want to point at the practice of loudness of images, images that perform, demand a response, and that, of course, has something to do with the practice of our protagonist of this part, which is Renzo Martins, who in 2008 released a very memorable and often sort of heavily criticized, controversial film titled Episode 3, Enjoy Poverty. A Guardian journalist summarized Martin's role as the one of a godless missionary come to teach the natives capitalism in capitalism's harsh gospel, how to monetize their poverty. What is the role of the loudness of image in Enjoy Poverty? If you have seen the film, of course, hopefully you have something to add in the discussion, but let me just briefly sort of sketch out the most famous sort of tagline that is associated with the film is where Martins goes through the Congo in different locations and teaches, at one occasion, teaches local photographers to no longer photograph jolly events such as marriages and celebrations and weddings and so forth, but turn their lens onto starving children, violated women, and corpses, because he points out that Western colleagues who sell this type of images to the Western agencies make $50 or so per image, which equates the sort of double the monthly income of a plantation worker. So he comes to the conclusion that actually poverty is a natural resource and it should be exploited. Of course, all this frustrates the spectator as to a great deal, not only what is said and the ethics of it, but also the behavior of Martins, all part of the sort of spiel, if you like. How do we read this in the context of the White Cube as a post-plantation project whose ethos is linked to the ethos of Martins' work? It is, in that sense, impossible to pin down. I hope, by the way, that you read this sort of quotations yourself. I will not look at them, but here he talks about a vision of this sort of reverse gentrification that might occur by putting this institution and bringing this sort of what is seen as a gentrifying sort of institution to this setting. But what does this actually mean? How serious can any statement be taken on the subject of betterment or improvement? And if I don't know, and the journalist doesn't know, what does the person who is to benefit from it, the ex-plantation worker, know about it? So this is really a problem of irony, isn't it? And I want to say a word about it because I think Martins is, in Western standards, by Western standards, a master. I suggest that we look at him for now, and he clearly wants that in this picture. By the way, he's singing a song in this. Well, watch the film actually. What he will. I suggest that we look at him with some admiration because of the performance of these many tongues that he puts on. So his heteroglossia includes the colonial master, Fitzgeraldo, the tourist, the entrepreneur, the aid worker, the white savior, the buffoon, the artist, the activist, and so forth. I see him actually, this other picture that you see on the right is not Boris Johnson off to work. It's actually a 16th century depiction of Till Eulenspiegel, who is a sort of a prankster in the European tradition. And I think that it's with admiration that I put some of aspects of Martins' work in this category. He performs pranks of every trappings of capitalism, its cruelty and its generative power. he does not judge. It is us, the spectator, who are left to do the judging. Artists are, however, artists acts of resistance or of vanity. And really, what is the difference? This is then a problem of irony. But more importantly to our discussion, can such practice inform the construction of alternatives? I find it informative to briefly look at a different documentary, one that involves an architect, Rem Koolhaas, very famous architect, who is actually one of the founding members of the office that was employed to build a white cube, who in 2001 was invited by the Harvard City Project, Harvard School of Architecture, to travel to Lagos. And there's a famous documentary that has been itself widely criticized. And I have put here a reading who wants to get a really good analysis of the film. That is not the critique of the architect, but of the film. So I wouldn't suggest that this is an ironic work at all, but the idea of going to Lagos and trying to sum up, the existence or the phenomenon of the African metropolis in a 10-day visit borders somehow on the absurd. In this documentary, Koolhaas, like Martens in his own, is sort of bouncing around, I would almost think, their embodied capital. In the Lagos documentary, we see this in the imagery. There is flyover with helicopters that drive by urbanism and the grandiose conclusions that go with it. They include the sort of idea that there's a self-organization of the city that one needs to learn from, that the derelict infrastructure is actually a nourishing ground for entrepreneurial opportunity. This Lagos is a model to learn from. And I think this has been, I have brought the 5 points that have been, taken to be lapses of judgment in the Koolhaas film, and here maybe for further discussion further on. And they are kind of informative if one were to look at if one were to look at this documentaries at the same time. I cannot say that Martens can be charged matched against the same categories, and it would be in a way unfair. Yet if one reads the commentary and tries to make sense between the two projects, there is almost a sort of negative affinity between them. If I were to work on a definition of a master irony and what this might be, I propose that this sort of combination of outsideness and detachment might play a role. Martens is developing, however, since then as an artist, I think, and also as an ironist. And I think that I've put here Karikache Seydou's commentary. We will come to his commentary in a moment again, which really sums up very well how this might be received, how the work might have been received at that moment. And if we put these two critiques together, I think one has to at least come to the conclusion that there is something to learn. And the question might then be, where do we go to learn? So this is the second part where I think I want to propose that settings where dealing with paradox is not by choice, but by necessity is are places where I propose one can learn something about a different type of irony, which I will call the provincialized irony. Of course, this is not to say that Ibrahim Mahama, the by now very famous international artist, is an ironist. I think this could be seen as misplaced, but I will do so anyway because of the way in which his work is really relevant to my work, and the way that I really cherish this very sophisticated dealing with problems of paradox, contradiction, and as we will see later on, maybe a little bit silence. This is the institution that Mahama built, and it has opened just some years ago. There's a wonderful story around it that I don't have, unfortunately, time to unpack, but I want to point at this sort of repurposed object at the end of their use value that he feels very attracted to. And these defunct airplanes, by the way, that he bought for $1 million and then brought to the site, serving as aspirational classrooms for local children. So if there is, in fact, irony here at all, it is of a didactic kind. I've brought these images. I could have picked many. I brought this one because I was hoping that some of you who are in London would have seen these exhibitions of Mahama that were in London just last autumn or so. And of course, you can see here the price tag of one of the works that gives you an idea how these new institutions that he's building in Ghana are actually financed by marketing these objects on the Western art market. But I find the other piece actually very interesting, which was part of the Wasted exhibition, and I have started to write about this idea of the circulation of these goods that are discarded and brought and dumped illegally in these landfills in Accra, and then brought back as art objects in gallery in order to teach us how to learn to live sustainably. So I'm very interested in the dynamic of this reversal and the role that heteroglossia occupies in this process and in his work. By the way, this little map there on the side, which is indicative of the dispersal of e-waste around the planet, is a way that I would start to think, if you were to ask me, where is the global elsewhere? Well, it's in the end of this arrows, isn't it? So Caricature Saidou's commentary provides probably the most insightful commentary on Mahama's work, and anyone who is in their wonderfully written essays and whoever is interested in that, this is where to go. But I want to point at this really interesting twist to this Ghanaian legend of the bird whose name spells go back to it, where this sort of avant-gardist twist to it seems to suggest that there is something in the past, in the post-colonial past of Ghana's post-independence, that one might have would be worth to picking up, to going back to. So this is at the same time a political, as well as, in Mahama's case, a pointer to a reuse of objects. And one of the objects, what I call here the non-white, non-cube, is this sort of the silos that are dotted all over Ghana that were built during the Nkrumah period and were never finished, and he is really interested in going back to them and transforming them into these art institutions. Well, I think that I want to quote for one moment, the influence that Saidou has on the people he has taught at the Kumasi College of Art. It's huge. There's hugely productive intellectual work coming from there. And if you were to look for it anywhere, I want to sort of shout out or name drop the Black Star Lines Kumasi, who is this cooperative or collective of ideas and practices. But here I want to read out something that has become quite intriguing to me, and encapsulates the quote, or expands on the quote on top of this page. So this is Caricature Saidou speaking, I think in 2018 or so, about his art practice or his teaching practice. I indicated how Ghana's art institutions had become a cultural slum by the turn of the century, owing to the rise of neoliberal market logic. Working in the cultural slum of KNU's College of Art Kumasi, my institutional critical response was to go on artistic strike, stop making art symbolically, and to inaugurate a practice of making artists. My political strategy was what I called ironic over-identification with the condition of the cultural slum. Through that, I hoped to transform art from the status of commodity to gift. I want to point you at the quote here and how much, you know, this sort of teaching and this sort of dialogue, intellectual dialogue that happens in this collective has influenced Mahama's work and Mahama's success. And this is sort of a map of where we have been. But of course, I want to come to the end of this. And I think, why have I gone through all this narrative and brought this is of course his trademark work of these youth sacks that are have gone through a cycle from transporting cocoa, then coal and so forth. And Mahama makes a very big point that he actually exchanges or buys these products and then is very involved in the fabrication and wants to evidence the labor that goes into the production of this. What are they really? Are they tapestries or veils? For me, they are important because they bring out something in the architecture that they cover. Namely, when I spoke about loudness before, I think here is an architecture that is allowed to perform silence. And silence is a really potent concept in architecture theory, as you probably all know. So I was wondering if this performing, if I could sort of go on and read this performance of silence as being a starting point to a process of meaning making that is not so much author driven, but dialogical. I would play this, of course, this is where this was all gonna head. We're back in the Congo, and we are here looking at the White Cube installation and the arrival of Mahama's work, that installation that happened just 2 months ago. On my commentary on this, just briefly, is that Mikhail Bakhtin, the theorist and philosopher, Mikhail Bakhtin, reminds us this irony as a speech genre is a form of silence. He suggests a really important link to humor, but that silence is a form that must fall short of laughter. I recognize the subtleties in Mahama's provincialized ironies. The title of this work, given to this work, is The Judgment of the White Cube. It was advertised by Martins as the first institutional solo show of Ibrahim Mahama on the continent. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate everyone involved to this amazing achievement. And I would just like to add one short comment. This is the news building Mahama's tapestries are ever going to cover. What is its history? It is also one that profits more than most from the performative transformation through dialogical subversion. Thank you. I would just let this run a little bit.
Thank you very much, Aleks. That's a lot of food for thought, and again, completely different perspectives being discussed. discussed today that actually bring together some really poignant issues. I'm going to invite also Marc to please switch on your camera again now that we can sort of open up the our conversation, and I'd love to hear more from Anna, from Marc, from Aleks, and I also would love to invite people to also ask questions. I'm going to open up a bit of the debate here. It seems, you know, it's interesting whenever I always find when we create these events that there's in the end some way in which you find some unexpected threads in very, very different situations. And for me, watching both of these presentations of these, again, hugely contrasting situations, but I cannot help but think of the of something that Marc, you touched upon before, which is the role of the arts, and it's it's interesting. This morning I was giving this session with that was to do with the idea of what do we mean by our traditional understanding of art that comes from the sort of the Enlightenment and Kantian theory of sort of purposeless purpose, sort of art that should be appreciated in its own right. And of course, what all these practices suggest instead, that art actually has a can have very clear purposes far beyond purely aesthetic appreciation. But of course, that aesthetic appreciation is also still part, and a very important part, of how art works. So this idea of the role of the artist is quite a key one and that I'd love to explore now, particularly when it comes to the role of the artist in situations of crisis, such as, for instance, of course, in the situation in Ukraine, and situations of economic inequality, such as the situation, for instance, that Aleks, you were talking about. Of course, a very difficult position of when you talk about the example, a very important example of Renzo Martin's, but of course a very controversial one. And I suppose it's controversial because we inevitably think of the artist's position in relation to the culture that they are commenting upon, and it's that can create often that potentially problematic kind of a debate. And so I'm going to ask again, Marc, Anna, and Aleks, to just, if we can unpick this idea of from your case studies or from your direct experiences, what is the role of the artist, particularly when we're often told that that art is sometimes almost like a luxury, but of course we all, of course, as you shared, art is again far more than a luxury, but it is a human need and a human right, as Anna, you mentioned before. What is the role of the artist in this particular, in these particular situations, particularly in those situations that are quite extreme, as we saw before? Who wants to start? Maybe Anna, do you want to tell us your thoughts on this?
Well, I wanted to thank Aleks for a really rich paper, which, when we were thinking about potential, resonances between Marc's presentation and this one, of course, I immediately thought that there will be forms of irony across post-colonial and post-Soviet contexts, that we could discuss. But let me just add what I was thinking into the mix. And this goes to the earlier part of Aleks' paper when he's talking about poverty as a resource, and particularly the way that photography has mobilized that resource journalistically, and we know that there's been a severe critique of that, right? And I think that, I've been thinking a lot, because our group is about performance and the public, I've been thinking a lot about the phrase theater of war, and how war has always had this deeply performative aspect. Often troops were fronted by, grand, bands and music brigades. But I'm thinking particularly about what we call the image wars, which is something that I worked on in the context of art and terrorism. and thinking about, you know, whether there has been a shift actually, Aleks, between the kind of powerful images that are used to communicate disaster, poverty in Africa and other places, and what we're seeing in Ukraine, which, you know, does of course document atrocities, but I think has shown they really are winning the image war, aren't they, Marc? They're winning the image war because of these images of heroic, positive resilience in the face of all of that. And this is a very different kind of image, which is interesting to me. And it's also, you know, the image of the violin player in the subway or standing in the middle of the square that could be bombed, the orchestra playing. And I think that this is a shift. And I wonder, Marc, how you feel as an artist, whether you actually somehow feel more in tune, let's say, with the government, in the sense that for once you have a leader who's trained, who has a creative education and knows how to mobilize these images in an extremely effective way. These highly performative images. So that's sort of what I was thinking about in the two papers, presentations.
Oh, Aleks, sorry, Marc, you are muted right now.
So shall I jump in there?
Go for it.
No, I mean, first I was stumbling over this sentence, you know, like Ukraine is winning the image war. It sounds a little bit like we're winning the image war because, you know, we are more creative, have the better images. But I think it's also it's just, no one said it's the truth, right? It's not propaganda. It's not we're winning the propaganda war. It's just Ukraine has really something to lose, and Russia has somehow nothing to win. And it is so real. I'm just so, yeah. It's not propaganda. It's real what we see, and it was for a long time in the post-Soviet Ukrainian society very difficult to really find your voice. You know, one of the most famous Ukrainian movies of, you know, the post-Soviet times is The Tribe. Tribe is a movie about people who they're deaf, right? They cannot really communicate. And this is so, you know, like typical in a way for the problem Ukraine had in the arts for the last 30 years is to find a voice, because to know your voice, the voice was killed under the Soviet regime, and it took a while, you know, till the artists were finally, with the filmmakers and musicians, find their own voice, because for a long time after, you know, '89, Western voices were in a way copied in the art scene in Ukraine, and only slowly, and then with the big bang in 2014, the Maidan revolution, I think Ukrainian artists started to really find their voice and become loud. And now it reached its peak by like really shouting to the world what has to be said from an Ukrainian perspective. And that Zelensky, as a fantastic stage man, theater man, drama man, performer, is the president in that moment and is using his team, his talent, I think it's just like a unbelievable coincidence in a way. My whole community, we all when the 140,000 Russian soldiers gathered around Ukraine, we all thought, fuck, now we have this Zelensky, this inexperienced politician. He's not a politician, he's just a comedy man, an actor. We were all wishing Poroshenko back. We thought Poroshenko is, you know, the experienced leader. But now we realize, yeah, that Zelensky, I don't think he's doing a theater, you know, he's not acting, he's not performing, but he is communicating, and he knows how to communicate. And every evening, you know, we're listening to his speech like everybody in Ukraine, and just sometimes he looks very tired, and he's not afraid to show that he's very tired. Sometimes he's very concerned and afraid, and he shows it. And there is an honesty in this actor's presence, which makes me forget that he is an actor, that he's really a true president in a way. I don't know. I'm kind of like blah-blahing a little bit here. But what I want to say, I never thought that I will stand behind Zelensky so much, and that I'm so impressed by him and what he's doing. It's incredible.
Thank you, Marc. Again, it's so fascinating to hear this insider your insider point of view into this, and so looking back at Aleks, so, and of course Anna, you raised this really important point. So Aleks, in response to these ideas, how does that fit within the remit of your particular research?
Right. Yes, thank you for the question and the suggestion. Well, so at the moment, I think I'm really interested in this idea of the image, because it has a lot to do with this remote setting, and particularly in this case study that I showed today. But there is actually an image war that Martins wages at the moment against. Don't know if you know this story. It has been actually covered in the news, where they're actually, now that they have built this institution, I'm just gonna briefly outline it. Now they have built this institution, they are asking for the repatriation of artwork that was taken from the Congo. And this particular artwork is a sort of power object, or sort of a wooden structure of a figure of a man, which depicts a colonial officer who was killed in an uprising in the 1930s by the plantation workers, who were sort of under you know, his rule of terror. And they took an opportunity to get rid of him, and then made this power object in order to trap his angry soul. And this was found in the 1970s. Normally these objects don't really survive, and it was found in the 1970s by an American anthropologist who bought it and brought it to the United States. And now, because they have this sort of idea of, we have now a white cube here, so why don't you give it to us? You give it to Switzerland, you give it to New York, and blah, blah, everywhere. Why don't you give it to us? And they had their reservations and health and safety concerns and so forth. So what Martins did, and I think this is really his best prank yet, he went to the museum's web page in Virginia, Museum of so-and-so, and he downloaded the image of this object, and then through blockchain processes generated a number of NFTs and sold them off. So now they're in a lawsuit where the museum actually had to go to court because of infringement of copyrights, which shows off the whole sort of paradox of and you know, the amount of this, how that this is not a colonial story that is sort of behind us now, but there's ever new iterations of it. And you know, this is brilliant work, because this is exactly where is sort of this complication and this frustration of processes comes in, you know, very productively. And you know, this is what is the role of the artist. Well, I can't say really, you know, normally I come from, obviously from architecture, we're more interested in solutions often than you know, creating complications. But actually to complicate is maybe sometimes very productive thing to do, and this can be discussed in its more widely, I think. And I think that what I wanted to say when we talk about image wars and wars about image and so forth, and the value of image, and this was just an example that, I think that there's a sort of fetish, commodity fetish attached to the image, sort of a value that that I would like to, that wins wars potentially, or sort of galvanizes huge amount of opinion and so forth. So there is a really strong there's a discussion to be had about what the quality and what the effect of images are on us, and how these are manipulated through artists, either way.
I just want to add that this has been a study, particularly in Germany, under the concept of Bild anthropology, trying to understand the power of images from a deeply sort of anthropological, cultural perspective. And I was involved in these research groups. And, the question sort of arises, yes, I mean, whether there is still something like an iconic image, or I understand how you use the white cube as an icon, and it is, but given the deeply image saturated world that we live in due to technology, there is a question whether, we can say that it's still possible to produce an iconic image the way that there was, say, in the era of Magnum photography and the Vietnam War, where one image of someone running from Hiroshima, that became the image of the war. And now, as I say, we live, we've just been absolutely saturated with images. And that's why I think that when I see something, a video or an image that moves me, I immediately come to all of these questions about, well, what is it that still has that power? And I think that's where the art comes in. Yeah.
I'm going to
Matthew.
Yes, we got a couple of questions and so little time. These are fantastic topics, by the way. So Matthew, you got a question, then after we got Parisa as well. So Matthew.
Yeah, hi. I'll try to be quick here. I mean, I thought it was a very interesting combination, quite a provocative combination. And Aleks, as usual, was quietly provocative, like self-effacingly provocative. But I think that some of these ideas are also very fascinating with regard to the idea of resistance in terms of the space between, and also in both of these claims to owning in a resistant way something about the situation that you find you can't control. There's a kind of a claim to realness in there somewhere. And I'm reminded of, and I think that some of the responses, especially when you hear news reports about people being amazed that there is a war in Europe, that suddenly it seems more real. And then that gives rise to being able to find a voice, whereas many in places like the DRC are so jaded about their endemic poverty and familiarity with war and having no hope, to the point where they have absolutely no faith in their own place in the world, that their only recourse is to irony, almost as a way of life. And you get these extraordinary celebrations of imagination over reality, such as, I'm sure, Aleks, you're familiar with the sapeurs, the extraordinary, extravagant, dressed up men who dance, who've now been obviously commercialized like everything else, through, for instance, Beyonce's sister making a video in the South African townships using sapeur styling. But this idea that we also know from, especially from Duchamp and Richard Hamilton's reconfiguration of Duchamp's concept of ironic affirmation, where irony can be claimed as a form of resistance that is affirmative, that is, asserted in the face of all the horrors of war, so that when you have control over nothing, you can still laugh in the face of death. And I think that power of the artist to enable the imagination to surpass reality, so that even when you are finding your voice, it is the claim to not have to be a victim of reality, where the power of art is really revealed to an extent. Not really a question, but maybe a way
A
to
very,
piece
very
this
interesting
together.
point. Absolutely, Matthew. What I'm going to suggest is that we also hear from Paris as well, and then we can open up for the last couple of minutes that we've got left. More discussion. That's a really interesting point about the also specifically the role of art of irony as well. Parisa, do you have a question? Oh, Parisa, you're currently muted.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. May I open my camera?
Yes, of course you can.
Okay, so let me open it. Sorry. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to have the opportunity to talk with all of your masters, experts, and professors. I'm from Iran, and as Dr. Scarso know me, in my country, I just wanted to add some points as the role of public art. My country, as you may know, faces lots of problems, economics, I don't know, political, and lots of different issues. Just for a little example, a few days ago, a newly built complex has been collapsed in one of our southern cities, Abadan. That was a catastrophe, and lots of our countrymen died there, and some of them are still under the debris. And you can't believe how much condolences are going through all of those towns and the province. All people here are so devastated. And I want to show and indicate my deep sympathy with Ukrainian people because my country has been attacked 43 years ago by a dictator regime. And it's not something very different from a war. Living under this regime with is beside of Russian regime, and we have lost lots of things these years, and it breaks my heart that it seems that war in this part of the world, it seems to be costumed by other war. It seems that war here is something of our life. Of course, my country is not in war directly now, but being an Middle Eastern means you will lose lots of things. And I want to return to the Abadan catastrophe. You can't believe these days people were protesting around the collapsed building, and they were mourning with a musical tradition. This is I wish you could see the videos in BBC or any other channels. You may find them. This is the pure public art for me. And through all these years, nothing but art could resist us to life. And I know how much art is important to survive. And all of these things that you showed and talked about were a bit of things that we have experienced, are experiencing, and I just believe that the only thing that precisely may help and rescue humankind will be art. Thank you so much.
Parisa, thank you so much. And that's the thing that, you know, sometimes, you know, we were debating just before, right, that we were saying, you know, there's something about so great about being in a physical space all together, but actually this these platforms allows us to hear, right, you know, of course, you know, right from Marc live from Kyiv, of course, Parisa talking from Iran, and there's and of course we can't wait to welcome you here on our course, by the way. And there's something very very important about this notion of the role of art. And even though we've got 1 minute left, maybe Marc, can we just hear from you? Maybe just one last word, you know, one last word on this point. You talked about before about the support that, of course, is needed in Ukraine. And it's so in terms of from what we just raised, you know, the role of art, what can art do? In your, do you want to maybe summarize for us how that role is important right now, especially in Ukraine at this moment?
Yeah, thank you. I think, Parisa, you said it perfectly. I think you said only through art, you know, we can move forward. Only art is the only way to overcome all this darkness, all the tragedies. And so thank you very much for, I think it's a fantastic closing word. And also thank you for, you know, passing your support from the people of Iran to the people of Ukraine. It means a lot. Thank you very much. And thank you for hosting this conversation. Thanks a lot.
So we've come to the end of the session. I'm also, by the way, taking that point, Aleks, that you mentioned before about the idea of art, you know, kind of purposefully complicating things. There's something very important there. I really like that concept, and I think we can. I think, you know, from today's case studies. So I just first of all just want to thank Anna, Marc, and Aleks for these really poignant discussions. And of course, we could, you know, an hour and a half will never do justice to these huge topics, but hopefully it's made us all think and hope that through art we can find some you know, solutions as well, and I can see lots of support from our audience. Again, this is going to be available as a session as a podcast on our research center. Just a little bit of publicity. I'm sorry to have to do this every time, but so this is the final talk of Creature for this year, but there are many projects that will happen through the summer, and the first one that's happening I'm just going to post it here. And so I hope that people can join us if you're based in London at the moment. So with the London Festival of Architecture, we're doing a project. I'm directly involved in this particular project of performance and virtual reality called The Shrine of the Goat, which will be on from the 10th to the 12th of June as part of the London Festival of Architecture. And I hope, so there's some information there. It'd be lovely to see you there in a physical and virtual installation. But otherwise, the other thing I really want to say is a big thank you to Mariana, who's been our research assistant for Creature for a year and has done an amazing job, and without whom we couldn't do anything. So thank you very much, Mariana, as well. Mariana is going to now start a new position, and we're going to be joined by our new research assistant called Jenny. And otherwise, thank you so much to our guests today, and most importantly, also thanks to these incredible contributions, Marc, Anna, and Aleks, and all our support from London, Marc, and let's absolutely keep this message going. So thank you very much. Have a nice evening, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you very much. Bye bye. Be safe.
Hi, Marc.